Hi, class. This story is a little late because we were away. We were up in Scottsdale for the weekend, and I managed to get my soccer thing in, but I didn't get this in. So I want to talk about my summer job when I was in college. My parents didn't have enough money to send me to school, so every summer and Christmas vacation and spring vacation, I worked for Kenny Construction. They built sewers and bridges. Unfortunately, my job was in the sewers. It was a very big company, and if you looked at a sewer job, you wouldn't notice anything happening up above the ground. See, you would see a hole in the ground, or a shaft they call it, and about a quarter of a mile to the other side you see another shaft, and there's usually was a big crane on each shaft. And when I pulled up the first time, I didn't know what was going on, and until I got down there, it was like a little city down there. And it was about 150 feet down under the ground. They built a wooden sewer first, and every 4 or 5 feet they had these big steel rings, and what they had was a mining machine, and it had big blades on it, and it would shave the clay off, and then they had little train cars down there, and it looked like a little railroad, a mining company. And then after the machine shaved the dirt off, it would go up a conveyor belt into cars, and then the cars would come out to the shaft, and the shaft would pull up the cars and dump them in the dump trucks, and they would take the dirt away. My job was, at the time that I want to tell you about, there was a worker there, and he didn't have too good of luck. And they had a big giant saw that you stepped on, and the saw came up and cut the boards. And they made the wooden sewer first, so these were called lagging. They were made out of walnut, and walnut won't break. It will bend almost in half, but it won't break. So it could hold the earth back as they made this wooden sewer. So he was working the saw once, and he chopped off his thumb, and they rushed him to the hospital and put it back on. And maybe 6 months later, he was walking outside during a thunderstorm and got struck by lightning. And then a month later, he was pouring concrete down in the sewer, and they make it's like a submarine. They pour the bottom first, and then the 3/4 of it, the round part, is poured another time, and it's a big form, and it has little sliding doors, big hatches that you pull out the pipe. And what they did was they have air pressure, and when the concrete gets pumped down to where the guy was that was blowing the concrete into the rest of the concrete, and they poured about 100 feet every day, and he slipped off the form and went between the wall and the thing, and was being buried alive in concrete until everybody jumped out of the form and helped him and dragged him out of the concrete. Well, in my time, I was a little luckier than him. I was 17 when I started, 18. I started working down there. You had to be 21 to be down in the tunnels, but I needed to work, so I went down there too. I just avoided telling everybody that I was that young. And so we were pouring concrete in that form, and what they did was they blocked off the real sewer, and we were putting in the rest of the newer sewer. And one thing, and they had a giant bulkhead that kept all the and reversed the flow of the sewer so it went the other direction, not towards us. Well, the one day I was down there, the bulkhead broke, and everybody started yelling, "The bulkhead broke, sewer gas, sewer gas." Years ago, when the miners used to work down in the tunnels, they always brought down a canary, and they had them in a cage, and everybody would watch the canary, because if the canary fell over, everybody would run for the top. And unfortunately, we didn't have a canary, but sewer gas, you can't taste it, smell it, and by the time it hits you, you'll be dead, because you won't have time to react. So I was deathly afraid, and the superintendent came down. I guess when we were pouring all that air down there, kept the gas from where we were. But he says, "John, how old are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm 18. He says, 18, that's an awful young age to die. Ooh. So I survived that. And years later, because I was a college guy, I had my own crew. And one year we were down in this 150-foot shaft, and there were 2 tunnels. But these were all stone, rock. And what they had to do was to, instead of the mining machine, the miners would drill giant holes in the stone and the solid rock, and then dynamite. And they'd blow out the middle, then the sides, then the bottom, and then the top came down. So I had my crew, and the superintendent told us that they should be breaking through to the other sewer today. So if it breaks through, I don't think it'll affect you guys too much. But one thing you have to do, because of the great pressure in that, because we're down 150 feet in the ground, and when they dynamited, it was only 8 foot in diameter. It wasn't really a big hole. So I was down at the end. It was like an L shape, and then the shaft was in the middle, and I was down at a dead end, and the other guys were in the other tunnel, and some ahead of me, but I was at the last spot there. So I had about 5 or 6 guys on my crew, and one thing they told you, if any time they dynamite down there, that you have to hold your ears and open your mouth to relieve the pressure. So everybody's thinking about that. Are they going to dynamite yet or this? Everybody had that on their mind. Now the only way out of the shaft was a metal ladder with rungs on it, and it took a long time to get up that ladder. You know, it was 150 feet, so it was pretty far. And so all of a sudden, I was down at that very dead end spot, and then the dynamite blew, and they blew right through that other wall. I guess they were a little closer than they thought, so the shock wave was unbelievable. And my helmet flew off, my hard hat, and my rain jacket and that you had on. You had to wear big boots and everything down there, because there was always water down there. And all my other guys are getting tossed around in the shaft, and the one guy yells down to me, "Hey, John," I said, I can only see every 10 feet there's a little 100-watt bulb. And so he started seeing, he says, "I can only see 10 lights." And he says, "I can only see 9 lights. And because the gas, the dynamite gas and that were coming towards him and the rest of the guys. So I says, "Get out of there as fast as you can." So I'm way down at the other end, and then I saw that the gas was covered the whole shaft. So by the time I got to the shaft, everybody was on the ladder or even climbing the metal rings trying to get out of there. And, you know, when you're trying to save your life, so when I got to where the gas started, I held my breath, and I ran on that ladder and started climbing up as fast as I could. I was climbing on top of guys. I was grabbing them and putting my foot on their head and getting farther. I'd go on the side and this way. I was the first guy out. There was 7 of us in the crew. I was the first guy out. It's funny how when it comes to try to save your life, what you do. And I have other stories. There was one time that I almost lost my life completely, and I'd like to tell you that the next time we do this, okay? Thanks.